Okay, so this is my personal film review of Spectre, the 24th James Bond film. That is excluding Never Say Never Again. Um, as I say with all my previews, or reviews I should say, there's a lot of spoilers in this, so if you haven't seen the film, um, just be advised that I am going to give spoilers in this video. So, just a few of my thoughts. Like I said, Spectre is the 24th James Bond film. It's one of the most successful film franchises in history, possibly the most successful actually in terms of its longevity. Um, this film has so far generated 679 million in the box office from a budget of 250 million, and from what I gather so far, it's the most successful Bond film commercially. Certainly broke the record of Skyfall for an opening weekend. Um, Cast: Daniel Craig as Bond, of course. Christoph Waltz as the main villain, Blofeld. Come to that in a minute. The Bond girls in this is Leah Seydoux, Monica Bellucci. Monica Bellucci, incidentally, at 51, was the oldest Bond girl, and I do give the film props for that because there has been allegations of the ageism in Hollywood. Um, I'd argue ageism's a bigger issue than sexism, but not to go off on the tangent. And she looks wonderful. She looks great. Um, Ben Whishaw as Q, Naomi Harris as Moneypenny, Dave Bautista as a henchman, Ralph Fiennes as M. So that's pretty much the cast. Actually, one more person I want to mention, Andrew Scott as Max Denby, who is ostensibly a member of the British government, but is actually known by his codename Q. Turns out to be the successor, essentially, to Blofeld, or the supposed successor. And there's others as well. But basically, this is the first Bond film since Skyfall, and Skyfall was a really pivotal film insofar as it's centered in Bond's personal life. It's all the death of M, previous M, played by Judi Dench. Um, One thing that was noticeable about Spectre was that this, I thought, brought out the personalities of Moneypenny, Q especially, and M more than previous films. Um, in the last film, we sort of saw Ralph Fiennes as M in the last few minutes, so this film really introduced him to the audience. Um, the opening sequence in Mexico City, I have to say, was possibly the best opening I've ever seen from a Bond film, and there's been some pretty good ones, from the boat chase in The World Is Not Enough to the exchange between agents in Die Another Day, um, to Live and Let Die. That there's been many good openings. For me, this is probably the best. Um, Actually, I mentioned Live and Let Die there. I saw some similarities between that. I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but the whole macabre sort of atmosphere there. This was focusing on Mexico's Day of the Dead, and that was a backdrop, and it gave a really sort of dark atmosphere, I thought. Like a combination of that carnival atmosphere with death as well. It was very clever. Um, Locations. Um, I think there was some originality in this insofar as Mexico's never been used before. Why not? It's a very cultured country. Mexico City is one of the world's great cities. Um, so, like I say, I really enjoyed that opening. Um, Apologies for the lack of structure with this video. I'm just really saying what's coming to my mind. But Sam Smith's Writing on the Wall, I wouldn't say it's my favorite Bond song. I think it's the sort of song that I could get into over time, but being brutally honest, it didn't really do a great deal for me just listening to it in the film in the way that some other songs have. I mean, Duran Duran's View to a Kill for me was hard to beat, and there's some others. Um, yeah, so I think it could grow on me, but as for the opening graphics, which to me is one of the hallmarks of a Bond film, it's something I always look forward to seeing. Yeah, it was pretty good. I like the whole octopus theme. I like that. Um, yeah, it was pretty creative. I always look for creativity in these opening sequences, and I think it certainly achieved that. Okay, I was going to talk about other locations. Um, Austria, well, I appreciate that sort of the headquarters of Spectre, but I think Austria has been used in many Bond films, so it's not that original. Again, Italy, I have a feeling, has been used in other Bond films. Basically, there's a Eurocentrism to Bond films that, and maybe for the next film they need to change a little bit. Mexico was really, maybe Morocco as well, to be fair. I don't think Morocco's been used before, but I can think of many, many exotic locations that haven't been used in a Bond film. And even if there's a problem with filming in those locations, they could double up other places and present them as those locations. I could think of many, many places. The Daniel Craig era is starting to do this. I mean, Shanghai, Mexico City, these are locations that haven't been used before. Just looking at the map of the world I have up there, I can think of numerous locations that hasn't been used. Peru, Argentina, India's only been used once. Indonesia's never been used. Um, Australia, come to think about it. There's many locations, Nigeria, that haven't been used so far, and there's some European destinations that have been used on multiple occasions. So I think, I appreciate that Austria is sort of the headquarters of Spectre, but that's something that I loved, by the way, the whole train sequence. I thought that was one of the best train fight sequences. This guy, Batista, who I speculated was a former wrestler, and it turns out that's true. He basically plays a henchman, the thug. Um, that's an excellent fight scene. It's reminiscent of Red Grant and Sean Connery and From Russia with Love. Actually, it's the best fight scene I've seen in a train sequence in any Bond film. It really is brutal stuff, and it's the Bond girl comes to her own in that scene. But I won't say much more. If you've seen the film, you'll know what I mean. She's a pretty good Bond girl, beautiful, um, fragile yet deadly in her own right. Bit of a mystery woman, so she definitely is quite a strong Bond girl. I thought. I would say more about Monica Bellucci's character, except that she actually doesn't play a very big role. I think it's about 10 minutes altogether. I understand in India that was controversial, the kissing scenes. I think there's a bit of hypocrisy in that because Bollywood is overtly sexualized, and yet for prudes in India to make such a fuss over the kissing scenes, I don't think they were particularly explicit. Um, I think that's hypocritical, basically, because Bollywood is extremely sexualized. So to me, that's hypocritical. But um, what else can I say about this film? Um, Sam Mendes done a fantastic job. He's directed a lot of these films now. Christoph Waltz, I think, is absolutely perfect as Blofeld. Waltz is wonderful at playing sinister roles. I first came across him in Water for Elephants, where he was a real bastard, and he manages to really encapsulate the archetypal villain who never loses his temper, who's polite, who's silent but deadly, and he runs rings around the other villains in the other three Daniel Craig films, and they were good villains. So this guy really is something else. One thing I liked about this film, and I speculated that they would do this after Skyfall, is the kind of retro feel to it. In many ways, it was very modern, very up to date, but it was also making a lot of allusions to the old Sean Connery's era Bond. The return of Moneypenny, the gadgets. There were certain aspects that I thought were really a return to the old Bond series. In fact, they opened with the sort of barrel theme. I don't think Casino Royale or Quantum of Solace or Skyfall done that, and I welcome that because there is a risk that directors and producers and so on, script writers want to be so creative and so original that they lose the soul of a franchise. And the good thing about Bond is they haven't done that. I think there were certain points that could have happened. And it's incredible to think around the time of, I believe it was A View to a Kill, there were serious questions about Bond even continuing, and they were seriously going to pull it. The studios were seriously going to pull it. That's 30 years ago, and it's more strong than ever. So I think it's has the potential to last another 50 years. Um, we are coming to the point where people are going to start talking about the next Bond. I read somewhere that Daniel Craig was contracted for 5 films, and he's done 4. So I think there may be one more Daniel Craig film. I may be wrong about that. There may, the next film may be a new Bond. Um, the ending of this film, like I say, his sort of basically this guy who is a very seedy sort of character who's playing this very malevolent figure who's kind of taken over world intelligence and trying to push for a world intelligence program is obviously finished off. So you think, well, it's not going to end there. Of course, Blofeld's still alive. Blofeld, of course, itself is going back to the days of Sean Connery. That's except that Blofeld was a bit older than Waltz's character. But I like the fact that he gets injured in this accident, and that gives him the sort of scar, which of course in the original films he had. The torture scene is quite hard to watch. One thing that is good about this film is it doesn't beat around the bush. It shows the murky world of espionage to be as gritty as it probably is. Of course, all the romantic factor is out of it, but it doesn't beat around the bush in terms of torture and so on. And it's not it's not a light film to watch. It is violent. It is seedy. I don't believe it's overtly sexualized, so I don't really know where the Indian censors are going for that. Apparently, it hasn't done well in China. I'm not sure why, because unlike Skyfall, there's nothing that could potentially offend the Chinese government. Um, I keep looking up at the map sort of to see if there's any more references. Tokyo made a brief appearance when they were having this World Conference on Intelligence, so Tokyo also made a brief appearance. Um, what else can I say? Uh, yeah, that's it really. That's I think out of 10, I give it 8. Um, for me, this is a very strong Bond film. At this stage, I'm not going to say it's the best because actually I'm about to watch Skyfall again. So I thought Skyfall was very impressive. I thought Quantum of Solace was underrated. There's a number of Bond films I felt were underrated. I thought Die Another Day got very bad press. I don't know why, because I thought it was a very entertaining film and it ticked all the boxes for what you want in a Bond film. Um, yeah. Um, Incidentally, I could not help feeling at the back of my mind. This is obviously a film about espionage, about international incidents and so on. I could not help thinking at the back of my mind the real life international incident that's going on right now between Ankara and Moscow. Not to bring that into a fictional film, but that's another thing about the Bond series. They've always been very careful not to point the fingers at any specific government, and that goes way back to the day when the original producers, Broccoli and so on, were very careful not to directly sort of implicate Russia in the storylines. I don't know whether that was so that they could get to an East European market, or I'm not quite sure why that was. Maybe it was for filming because they realized they would have to maybe film in Russia in the future. Don't know why, but um, likewise, Spectre doesn't point to any specific government, and that's very clever. That's it really. There's no doubt I will think of further things to say when I finish uploading this video. Dave Bautista is excellent as a henchman. He was a real low life thug. Um,